So before we start, I guess thanks everybody for joining us for our first ever virtual open house here at Touchstone Center for Crafts. There's a whole slew of different things going on today. Be sure to jump onto our website, touchstonecrafts.org, and check that out. They did just finish unloading our wood kiln, which was a live stream of that, which is kind of a great process. And we're really excited to be working with Artist Craftsman Supply, be doing kind of a hands-on project for everybody. So welcome and jump right in.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be making cardboard looms, so you can do some small scale weaving, or depending on the size of your cardboard, some large scale weaving. So today we're going to have something along the lines of about this size, and it really depends on what size cardboard you have. I'm just kind of keeping it on the smaller side today. You want to make sure you're using a corrugated, just so you can see, a corrugated cardboard rather than a cereal box. And when you're measuring, you want to make sure that the corrugation is vertical. So what we want to do is, before we start weaving, we have to make our warp threads. So what you want to do is, so my cardboard is about a little over 8 inches, and that's okay. Doesn't need to be even. You just want to make sure that it's about as square or rectangular as possible. I like to leave about 1 inch on the sides. So I'll start by marking 1 inch, and then from there, I'll mark every 1/2 inch. And I'm just marking about 1/4 inch from the top. Stop at 7. And then this is important. You want to make sure you have an even number of marks. So I have 13. I don't want to get too close to the edge here, so I'm just going to get rid of that last one there. And then you want to do the same thing at the bottom. Make sure you start 1 inch from the side. If you want a closer knit weave, you can do every 1/4 inch, but I found it's a little bit tricky with the corrugation. So it is possible, but you might find that your cardboard kind of flips over a little bit. The 1/2 inch is just a lot easier to work with. So I'm going to make sure, I think I made an extra one again, so I did make an extra one, so I'm going to get rid of that last one. So now we just want to cut down to the bottom of all the lines we made. And it doesn't need to be exact with how far down you cut, just as long as it's relatively close in length. All right, so once you have your marks cut, then we are going to warp our loom. So for this part, I like to use a thinner string rather than a thicker one. You can certainly experiment with making your notches a little wider to allow for a thicker yarn. But I think when you're just starting, I think a thinner string or yarn works a little bit better. So to start off, I'm just going to knot a small loop. And this is just so you kind of have something to hold on to. It doesn't need to be any kind of particular loop at all. And you know what? I think I cut an extra mark on here, so I'm just going to double check and make a note for myself not to use that one. Yep, so I'm just going to X that off. All right, so I'm going to take my loop and flip it over to the back. And we're just going to tape it down. You can use any kind of tape. I'm using painter's tape, but you can use masking tape, Scotch tape, whatever you have. Okay, so we tape that to the back. And then all you're going to do now is you're going to wrap it, making sure that you get in each of your notches. So I brought mine up to the top just because that is a little easier for me with wrapping, but if you want it to start at the bottom, that's okay too. And then you're going to wrap behind and just make sure you get all of your notches. Try to keep in like an even tension with each one. It doesn't need to be perfect, but a nice thing about the cardboard is it doesn't really allow for it to slip around too much, so it holds the string pretty tight in there. And there's lots of different ways to warp a cardboard loom. This is just the way that I found was the most easy for me to do. If you're using a little bit of a thinner cardboard, you want to make sure you don't pull too much because your top teeth can kind of come forward a little bit. But if you find that that's happening, just try to wrap a little bit looser. So again, that was the extra slot I made. I'm not going to use that one. And I'm just going to double check that I have an even number of warp threads here. Okay, so I have 12. That's a good place. So now we have the extra tail here. We're going to go to the back, and if you have a buddy to help you, you can have a buddy help you, but if you're really a pro at wrapping presents, you might not need a buddy. So I just cut a little bit so I have an extra tail here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully take the tape off of the knot that I made earlier. I taped it a little too well. So then here's my beginning string, and you know what, I'm going to bring that it got kind of tucked under my threads there. I'm gonna bring it out, and all you're gonna do is just tie a knot. If you need someone to put their finger there, you can have a buddy help you. And I just tied it twice just so we got a nice knot there. So now what I'm gonna do is just cut off the extra so it's not in the way. I won't cut it too close just because I like a little bit of insurance with the threads there. So now you notice the front of the loom has straight vertical warp threads, and on the back they go diagonally, and we also have this cross too. Okay, so now we're gonna put some things behind our warp threads just to give us a little bit more tension and a little bit more space to work with. You can use pretty much whatever you have on hand. If you have strips of cardboard, you can use that. If you have like a pen or a pencil, you can use that. I've used a stick that I found outside, but today I'm just gonna use dowel rods. You can also use straws if you have those. It's just anything that is small enough to fit under your threads, but also help to give you a little bit more tension. So you just kind of work those in under your warp threads. This also helps to keep you from pushing your weave threads too far down. You don't want them super close to the edge. So I'm going to do that at the top and the bottom. And you just kind of scooch it up to, it'll kind of not go any further, so you can just kind of push it up to where it feels good for you. And then do the same at the bottom. It's a little easier to stick it under where the first one is, and then just slide it down. So now you can see we have, I don't know if you can see it there, a little bit more space under your warp threads there. And that'll be, yeah, that looks great. So that'll give you a little bit more space to bring your yarn or your string through. Okay, so your loom's all set up, so we can get to weave now. A few notes on weaving materials. The thicker your thread, the faster your piece is going to weave up. It's just like knitting or crochet. So if you're using a thicker yarn, you'll have a faster project. If you use a thinner yarn, it might take a little while longer. Today I am going to use, to start with, I'm going to use a thicker yarn just to show you, and so it shows up a little better on the camera. When it comes time to switch to a different color, I will bring in a project I started last night. It has a thinner yarn, so you can kind of see the difference between the two yarn weights. So because we're working on a smaller scale, I'm gonna just pull off an amount of yarn that I think I want. So if you want just like a super thin strip of a color that you have, I wouldn't pull off a whole lot, but so I pulled off about, I know it's kind of hard to tell, but about this much. So that's an amount that feels good to me. You know, you can always add more. And then there's a couple different ways to do this part. This is the way that I like to do it. I like to start off by tying a knot. Some people don't. Some people like to leave a loose tail and then weave in their loose ends later. I personally don't care for that, but if you get more into like making designs or color blocks that aren't just strips of color like this. If you just wanted to start putting patterns in the middle, then you might want to consider weaving your ends. But today I'm just going to be tying mine. I think it's faster, especially if you're just getting a feel for what weaving is all about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the end. It doesn't really matter which side you start on. So I'm going to start on the left today. So all you do is just tie a knot. I like to do 2 just to be safe. 1 would probably suffice, but I like a little bit of insurance there. And then I'll trim it a little bit. And the nice thing about this is you can just flip it behind your warp threads. Once you're finished, all of your tails should be behind your weaving. This is, you can kind of see it on here. These were the tails that I switched colors on. So these are just all on the back here. But now we need to find, let me get these scraps out of the way. You want to find the other end of your yarn. And if you have a tapestry needle, this is what I prefer. If you don't have one around the house, you could just use a piece of tape and tape it to a popsicle stick, or if you have a smaller piece of cardboard, if you do have like a cereal box cardboard, you can make a little guide for you. Really, whatever works for you, and whatever you have on hand. So I'm going to trim this a little bit just to get it in the needle. And this is a little bit thicker. You might have, if you're using a tapestry needle, sometimes it's a little tricky getting a thicker yarn in the tapestry needle, but
I have a yarn needle.
okay, that works too. And because we have so much yarn, I really like to pull the tail through pretty far, just to kind of lessen the amount that we're actually pulling the yarn through. Oh, I pulled it a little bit too far there. Okay, so my tail is about right here, and then I have about that much without a tail. So now we can finally start to weave. So the important thing with weaving is you always want to go over, under, over, under. Because we have a knot to start with, I'm just gonna go under on my second one, considering the first one an over. And if you need to pull it through in the middle, like I just did, just be aware of what, if it was over or under where you pulled it through. So I pulled it through on an over. So just make sure on this one, you start with under again. So on the end, I had an under. So every time you go back the other way, you want to make sure you do the opposite. Otherwise, your weaving is just going to fall apart. So we're going to start over on this edge. So we're going to go over under this time. And sometimes your yarn might get a little tangled. I like to put my hand just lightly on the top, just to kind of keep it from getting too tangled. And when you pull your yarn back through, you don't want to pull too hard. You just want to get it so you just don't want to pull too hard, because otherwise your weaving will start to come in on the sides. This is kind of an example where, I don't know if you can tell there, it's a little bit short. It's a little bit shorter up here than it is right here. It's a little bit wider right here. And you can kind of tell on this one here, it's kind of starting to pull in a little bit there, but not too much so that it bothers me. So if you pull too hard, you can really start to choke out your weave, and you'll just wind up with a triangle rather than a rectangle or square. Another thing you can do, today I'm weaving from the top. You could also choose to weave from the bottom. Whatever way works for you. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference, because every time you pull your thread through, you want to push it either, if you're working from the bottom, you want to push it down. If you're working from the top, you want to push it up, just to get a nice thick weave happening. And there's lots of different resources on the internet to show you. You can make like fringe in your weave. I haven't really mastered that one yet, but if this is something that you find that you like doing, there's definitely a lot of good material on YouTube to show you like different patterns you can make, different materials that you can use. It's really a versatile project. You can make really small things like coasters. You can make huge things like wall hangings. So, and when I come back through, I'm just making sure I am starting in the opposite way in which I finished. So we're going to go over again. Now, I might not use this whole length of yarn that I started with, because I do want to show you what it looks like with some fabric strips that I cut. Because you can get some really interesting textures depending on what materials you're using. I still haven't decided if I like pushing the needle through the whole way or if I like coming through in the middle, but whatever works for you. If you have a needle, if you're using a popsicle stick or a piece of cardboard, you'll find what is easiest for you. Now that my tail's coming through a little bit, I'm gonna adjust that on my needle. So I'm just gonna find where my tail is and give it a little bit more space. And again, as a reminder, every time you pull through a line of a weave, you want to make sure you're pushing it against your weave that's already there. So just make sure you push that up or down if you're working from the bottom. So you can already see that this is weaving up really quickly. I think I've only done 4 or 5 here, and I have about a ½ inch. If I was using a thinner, or if you're using a thinner yarn, it might not be quite that much, but, and I know sometimes it's hard when you think you have a lot and then you push your weave up and you're like, oh, it's actually not that much yet, but it's a nice project to do if, it's a nice rainy day project. If you're just watching TV, it's a very good at-home project, which we're all doing a lot more of right now. So I am going to do one more here, and then let's switch to a piece of fabric. So again, I pulled that in a little bit too much and it kind of started to come in a little bit. You can just pull it back just a tiny bit and then push it up. So I'm gonna switch to a strip of fabric just to show you what that's like. So I'm gonna cut this and then just make sure you still have your needle on hand. So this is the tail of my fabric here, or sorry, my yarn here. I'm gonna grab some fabric. And much like if you were just gonna switch yarn colors, all I'm gonna do is I have them lined up together and I'm just gonna loop them in a knot. And I like to pull it pretty tight just, you know, for that insurance so it doesn't come loose. And I don't like how long that tail is, so I'm gonna just trim it a little bit. And again, if you're working with a yarn needle or a tapestry needle, you should be able to thread through the fabric on it. If you're just working with cardboard or a popsicle stick, you can just tape it. So my fabric strip isn't that long, but I do still have some yarn here. So this will probably do maybe like two more yarn weaves, and then we'll get to the fabric. So again, just make sure you start on the opposite side, or the opposite of what you finished with. So this ended with under, so we'll start with over. And just be a little bit gentle because that knot might get caught on your warp threads. So just be aware of it when you're pulling it through. I think this will be probably the last yarn row here. Just let me gently pull that knot through. Okay, so my knot is pretty close to the edge. That's okay because it's going to come back through on these two. So you can either leave your fabric strips flat if that's an aesthetic that you like. I kind of like the bunched up look, so I'm just going to push it up like I have been doing with my yarn. Now my knot is right here, and I'm going to do my best to flip it behind the weave. So I just kind of push it up a little bit. It should be okay. And it'll be less noticeable the more weaving rows you have. So as you can see, the fabric gives you a much different texture than the yarn does. And that's a really nice thing about weaving is you can really experiment with a lot of different materials. It's really easy to work with items that you have on hand. You know, I do work at an art supply store, but all of these things I had at my house, we do also carry a lot of these things as well. So we'd be happy if you stop by on your next trip into the city. Yeah, it's just a really easy way to make a nice piece of textile art for you or someone you love. fabric also weaves up really quickly too. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a project that I was working on last night to show you how to finish your weave. You can certainly keep weaving and come back to the video later. I believe it will be on the Touchstone website and on Facebook. So this is one that I was working on last night. And I already pointed out one problem that I pulled a little bit too tight and it started to come in on the sides. But again, that doesn't really bother me. I was using a thinner yarn, so you can see what that looks like in comparison to the thicker yarn and the fabric strips here. It just gives you a very different texture, so you have a lot of possibilities. So I could probably add a little bit more to the bottom here. I'm going to choose not to. So what I'm going to do, let's see, there we go. I am going to tie a knot at the bottom. So I ended on the left-hand side. You're just going to tie it around the warp thread that's farthest to the left. And you can either choose to flip it around when you're done, or what I'll probably do is I probably will thread it back up through the weave, and I'll show you how to do that also. So this is kind of the scary part. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take out your dowel rods or whatever you used to increase the tension on your warp threads. So we'll just take those out. And we'll flip it around to the back. So again, these are our diagonal, the back side of our warp threads. And this is the ultra scary part, is we are just going to take a pair of scissors and we're just going to cut the back of the warp threads. Gosh, it even sounds sinister. So I'm going to carefully work these warp threads back through the notches that I made in my loom. I don't want to disturb the weave too much during this process. Just flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so now your weave is successfully off of your loom. You can keep this and use it again. The nice thing about cardboard is if you don't like the size that you made, you can make another one. There are many different ways to weave. I've seen people use chair legs if you wanted to make a bigger one. There's just a lot of possibilities, and that's a really cool thing about this craft. Okay, so now we need to finish. So I told you there were a couple of things that were wrong with this. Well, not wrong, but just a mistake that I made. So this is why we really want to have an even number of warp threads. I made a mistake and I have an odd number here. So it's not the worst thing, but it's just going to make my finished product look not quite as even as I would have liked. So you have a few options here. There's a few different ways to finish a weave. You could just tie all of your threads and tie all of your warp threads and weave them into the back if you don't want visible warp threads. If you like the aesthetic of the hanging warp threads, there's a few different things you could do there. You could also make, like the first one I showed you, you can make a wall hanging. You know, and you just attach either one of the dowel rods that you used, or I used a stick from the backyard. Again, a lot of different possibilities here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to finish the bottom, and then we're going to wrap it around a dowel rod on the top. So you can see here, this already kind of got a little bit loose. So I'm just going to carefully just push back up a little bit because we don't want it to get too loose. Because I had an odd number of warp threads, I'm just going to have to come up with a creative solution for the last 3 here. But what you want to do is take your first 2 warp threads and tie a double knot. And if you're really savvy with knot tying, you can experiment with different knots. I'm just doing these for ease. You can also consider braiding your warp threads. There's a lot of different things you could do. Okay, so now I'm down to my last 3. Ideally, I would only have 2, but I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tie the first 2 together, and then I'll tie the last one onto the middle one, just so everything is secure. But again, ideally, you wanna have an even number of warp threads. And I'm going to trim that. That was the knot from when I first warped the loom. So we'll just get rid of that. Okay, so now that secures the bottom part of your weave. Like I mentioned before, you can choose to thread these back up into the back of your weave. All you would do in that instance is flip your weave over so the back is facing you. Thread one of your warp threads into your needle, and then just weave it up into your weave. You can do this a couple times. You can run it up a whole weave here. You just want to make sure that it's not showing through on the front. I'm going to take mine out because I like the hanging look. You could also do this if you have any stray weave threads that you started. This is the one I started with. I am going to weave that one back through because I don't really want that one hanging off the side. A little bit tricky because I did cut it kind of short. Actually, I might have cut it too short to weave it back in. Might have to do it by hand. I just gently pulled it through. I just gently pulled it through a weave on the back, so now it's just secure back there. Okay, so now that we have the bottom part of our weave secure, let's talk about the top. Now, you can, again, you can choose to just tie all of your warp threads like we did on the bottom, or you can attach it to something to make it a wall hanging. You know, the woven wall hangings are really big right now. So if that's something that you want to do, you certainly can. Much like on the bottom, if you're tying it to something to make it a wall hanging, I like to just tie one first tie a knot first before you tie it to your dowel rod or your stick or whatever you're choosing to use. Just so you are securing your weave first. Because again, we don't want all that hard work just unraveling. That would be a disaster. I'm actually gonna put this, I don't know if this helps it, makes it easier to see what I'm doing. I shouldn't have used white warp threads with white paper covering on the table. But again, we're just gonna double knot our warp threads at the top. The nice thing about this too is if you decide you don't want this to be the top, you can just flip it over and you can make this the top too. Okay, so this is an extra weave thread. I'll weave that back in later. Right now I do want to show you how to put the dowel rod on. So ideally, you want to separate your warp threads. You want to have one in the front and then one in the back. So the front one I always pull down, just so it's a little easier when you're going and tying your dowel rod knots. I might just do a double one on this side because I did have an odd number, but that's okay. It's just creative solutions. So now that you have all of your warp thread pairs separated, just lay your dowel rod or your stick down on top and tie a knot. And again, by now you should know I like 2 knots. And if you really don't like the look of the knot, you can work it towards the back. I don't mind the look of it so much, but whatever your preference is, you can just figure out where you want that knot to be. I moved these knots to the back as best I could. I'm just going to trim them a little bit. And then I'll just work those ends towards the back as best I can. Also, if you don't like the knot showing, when you put your dowel rod on, you could flip your weave over and do it from the back. I find that that kind of makes it a little bit easier to make sure that the knot is in the back, if that's something that you want. I'm just gonna sew this end in really quickly. I can get the thread on the needle. And again, when you're sewing in the tails, you can just try to go for some spots that won't be visible in the front. It doesn't really matter where you put it, just as long as you don't see it on the front. And you can flip it over to check. So I don't see it, so that looks good to me. And you just want to be careful because you don't want to pull too hard. And that's still pretty long, so I'll just trim that. Okay, so now, last step, if you've chosen to do a woven wall hanging, is let's go with this one. You can use a yarn that matches your weave. You can use something else. On this one, I had used like a hemp twine for my warp threads, so I used hemp for the hanging string. So, you know, you can trim your warp threads as short or as long as you like. So all we need to do is determine how long you want your hanging thread to be. I'm not very particular, so I'm just gonna wing it on that one. And all you do, and again, you can choose to do this from the back if you don't like visible knots. And just tie a knot on both sides. And I'll trim the excess. You can also experiment with making fringe for the dowel rod if you like. You know, there's lots of different ways that you can add or embellish your weaving. This is what we went over today is probably the most basic form of weaving. So now we have a finished weaving that can hang from a hook or a nail. So yeah, this is a very, very basic, very easy, and also easily expandable textile project. I'm a textile artist myself, and I love anything soft and pliable. So this, I think this is a really great project. Anyone can do it. So yeah, I'm really happy that you all joined me today and joined Touchstone Center for Craft. If you find yourself in Pittsburgh in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood, we would love to have a visit from you. We carry art supplies for kids and students and professionals, so we'd love to see you. Does anyone have any questions today? Anyone on the Zoom call have any questions?
This is great, Reba. Thank you. This is kind of how mine turned out. I didn't tie off the top part, but
oh, yeah, that looks good. Yeah.
I didn't have any fabric strips, but I love how yours looks with the black, dark brown.
Fabric, you can use, you know, like wool roving is really thick and nice. So yeah, you can get lots of different textures going on.
Maybe even leather strips too.
Yeah, leather, even paper works too.
Oh yeah. Oh, this is great. Thank you. You explained it so well, and
So bad.
it's fun to be able to have a project with such simple materials.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially, you know, staying at home, we're constantly searching for ways to occupy.
Yeah, I had to borrow my yarn from the neighbor I loaned it to the other day. I borrowed it back to do different projects. So this is good. Thank you so much. This is really good, and I'll look on the website for some of the things you carry, and including some of the organizational tools.
Okay, great.
That's what I've been looking for. So you're in the Pittsburgh area, is that right?
Yeah, we are in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood. We're just a block off of Murray Avenue.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I actually live around Cleveland, Ohio, but my boss lives in Pittsburgh, so
We have a few visitors from Cleveland every once in a while.
yeah. And I definitely want to head over to Touchstone to do some classes when they're back in session perhaps next summer.
Touchstone's great. I have many fond memories of taking classes there when I was a kid.
Wow, great. Thanks so much, Reba. Appreciate it. Yeah. Is that all we need to do today?
That's all I have today. Do you have anything else?
I'll check the schedule for the rest of the afternoon and see if I want to join in to some of the open house activities.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us, and a big thanks to the Artist Craftsman Supply for doing this wonderful demonstration for us today. There's still some stuff left happening throughout the day, so make sure you jump on over to touchstonecrafts.org and see all the different things we have going on. And thank you, and everybody have a good day.
Okay, thanks so much. You too. Appreciate it.
We did it.